Hi guys, today I'm joined by my colleague Richard and we'll talk about various things: computing, jobs, game development, software development, and essentially how to be a successful developer in these days. Hi Richard,
Hi there.
please tell us a bit about yourself, your background, so the audience knows who you are and what you do.
Sure, I'm kind of a dinosaur in making games. I started in 1982 when I spotted an opportunity to essentially make video games, and I talked my manager into starting a games company. The company was called Palace Software, and we started making video games. And yeah, obviously this was a time where very few people made games, so it's very different to today, where it is today. And just in case, this is one of the first games I made, and it came on, who knows what that is, cassette tape, right? Yeah, so that's a successful game. And since then, I've basically been working for various games companies. I worked for Palace Software about 5 or 6 years. Then I worked for a large American company called Mindscape, and then I was an executive at Electronic Arts for quite a while. And I've also run various businesses, so all related to games. And now I teach at the University of Brighton.
Great. So I've got some questions which I looked up. These are supposed to be popular questions in the general development industry, computer science, and so on. They're not in any particular order. So shall we begin then?
Go ahead.
Is current game development market more competitive than it was, say, 20 years ago? And how easy would you say is it to get into game development now?
The market is very different. The nature of competition is very different. When I started off, there were no tools. You had to build your own tools. So effectively, it's actually quite hard to make games. And because it was hard to make games, the real challenge was being able to make the games. However, it wasn't that difficult to sell the games once they were made because relatively few people were making them. So it was technically hard, but marketing easy. Nowadays, that is entirely on its head. Nowadays, it's actually very easy to make games with tools like Unity, which is an excellent tool for mobile, and UE4, which is a brilliant tool for console and PC. And pretty much anyone can make games. The only problem is everyone's making them. So now marketing your games and getting to be actually monetizing them is a lot harder. So I'd say actually in terms of difficulty, it's about the same. It's just the difficulty is switched from how to who in terms of now, how do I make it to who will buy it? So I think that's really the challenge today's games makers face is will they find an audience and can they monetize it and make a living out of it?
Yeah, it's very interesting to see how these things change over the years.
It is, and I've been through the whole evolution, to be honest. And one of the things that's most interesting nowadays is with mobile. That's even made it more of a democracy. When I used to work on console games, like this is a PlayStation 1 game, that was a very restricted market in that PlayStation would only take a number of games per publisher every year. So they would only take, I think EA, they would only take 10 games from EA every year. So we were really careful what we put on PlayStation because we could only do 10. We had 10 slots. So we picked the games really, really carefully. I think nowadays with mobile games, like the app stores will take everything. Right? As long as you don't contravene their terms and conditions, which are mostly about them making money out of you, and not to do with the quality of the game. It's more to do with whether they can monetize your game and make their 30%. You can put anything up. So it's a kind of a very different thing. And if you think about this, if you can't only make 5 things, you make sure those 5 things are very good.
Yeah,
right?
certainly.
If you have the ability to make 1,000 things, you're less
worried
fussy,
about the quality,
right?
I suppose.
Fussy. But that's ultimately a problem. That's ultimately a problem because it means you end up with a lot of stuff in the App Store that will never get downloaded. So I think it's very important these days to get noticed really quickly, and it's very important that you really think about making games as a holistic experience, which includes everything, including social media. So it's actually marketing is more important these days than ever. I think that's the biggest shift.
Yeah, and that goes back to your previous point about marketing being more important.
So I think it's really important if you're going to be successful making games, you've really got to move away from what games do I want to play, because you are probably not the market. You want to look at what games will other people play and really understanding what they will do. So I'll give you an example. If I wanted to make a game where you are, I know you're running a cat farm, right? Where you're making cats and breeding cats. You've really got to understand who would want to do that. Before you make the game, even if it's a really cool game, unless you know who's going to buy it, you are lost. You're just going to get lost in the tons of other games coming out.
Right, and that kind of brings us to my next question, which you already answered, about being a successful game developer. So you really need to know your audience.
You do. You need to be. I would say if you're going to be successful, you need to have a sense of urgency, right? Because there's a really good chance that a lot of ideas are based on this. I'm going to use a German word called Zeitgeist, which is kind of the ghost of our time, which basically means there's a really good chance if you have an idea, the roots for the idea, other people will also have the same roots, and the idea. So this is why things happen in multiple chunks, So you'd have a game idea to do something, and then you realize that actually 5 other people doing the same thing, and actually the person who's going to win is the person with the best product to market the quickest. So this really built-in sense of urgency, I think, is really important. I think you also have to be really honest with yourself. You got to have a certain amount of faith, but you can't rely totally on faith, right? If you're getting feedback from people who have played your game or played your prototype, I don't mean your idea, I mean actually interacted with it, and they're telling you that it doesn't work, their voice is much more important than your faith. Because ultimately you can't be in a box or you can't be downloaded with the game to do the evangelist sell on everybody. So yeah, have confidence, but be prepared to change your mind if you see that actually it's not doing what you expect it to do. So this flexibility, I think, is really, really important. The other thing which I think is really important is kind of having, if you want to do games which appeal to the masses, make sure your team is diverse. And I think your team will keep you honest. And if you listen, I think I'm not saying that you really want a team where, if you have somebody who's got a really good sense of urgency, right, their downfall will be they'll want to do everything really quickly. They might not give things the time to mature.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you have a bunch of people in the team who'd want to take their time, you'll never ship anything. And neither of those are good scenarios. So what you really want is you want a team with somebody who is a real pain about, let's get it done now. Let's get it done now. And you want somebody who goes, well, hang on, let's just take an extra couple of days on this to just see. And somewhere in that compromise, you're going to hit the sweet spot.
Yeah.
So you really don't. My advice is don't build teams which are monoculture where everybody's singing off the same song sheets. You want a few people who are not necessarily disagreeing, but it's important the team has respect. So you've got to realize that your superpower, say for example, you're the world's best programmer, right? That comes with a baggage, just like superheroes, right? Superheroes, Superman can do everything, but actually he can't form attachments and relationships because he'll live forever, right?
Yeah.
It's a downside. So your programming superpowers come with a downside of that you might not really think about the art, right?
Yeah.
So get somebody who does think about the art, right? And similarly, if you have a team where everyone's thinking about the art, they're not thinking, how is this going to work?
Yeah.
So my advice always be, just be really clear about your limitations and actually hire and surround yourself with people who fill in the gaps in your own traits or experience.
I suppose, like with anything else, you need balance.
You do, and you need to be. I think also the other thing, which kind of contradicts slightly what I've said, is ultimately somebody has to be in charge. This cannot be, if you're making a game, this can't be like a tree hugging commune where everyone just it ultimately you have to empower one of the team members to be the boss, and you all have to say, I'm not saying this is always the same person, but somebody has to make a decision because otherwise you'll never go forward. So I think that's also another thing which is counterintuitive, is have somebody as the boss. And sometimes it's the boss may not be the person who founded the company, and that's okay. So and your boss might change. You might change your outlook. So when you're founding a company and you're finding that you really like the techie aspects, and after a while you realize actually you really want somebody who's more marketing focused, just hand it over to somebody. It doesn't stop you being techie. So play to your strengths and understand your weaknesses.
Yeah, that's a great way to summarize this. And so that's about becoming a successful game developer. What about degrees? Do you need one in order to get into game development industry? I suppose this is an interesting question because depending on who you ask, you might get slightly different results.
Yeah, so although I teach at university, I made my first few games without a degree. I did my degree much later in life at the Open University, and that's how I got my degree. And I did it while I was working full time. And I did this because I actually loved work. I loved work more than studying. I think it's kind of ultimately you need to make your own decision if you need a degree or not. One of the things a degree will do is it'll give you a good way of formalizing your thinking. It'll give you a discipline of working to deadlines. And, obviously now it's a little bit tricky with COVID, but at some point when you get together as teams, it'll give you the opportunity to work with other people and kind of form these proto teams. But it's not going to get you a job. I'll be really honest with you. A degree will not get you a job, right? Because getting a job is really a degree, I would say, is probably 20 or 30% of doing that. And it'll give you the discipline, but it's more about kind of shaping you up as an employee. Just because you graduate with a good degree means you're probably going to get an interview, but ultimately the interviewer will assess if you're a good fit for the company or not.
Yeah.
So I would actually think, I say to all of my students, the best path to get a great job is an excellent portfolio. If you're not spending your 3 years or 4 years at a university building a portfolio, you're really missing a trick. You will never have as much time on your hands as you will at university to build a portfolio.
Yeah, most certainly.
So build your portfolio, ruthlessly build your portfolio. If you're a programmer, go on GitHub on day one of university and check in stuff every single day, right? So when somebody asks you how much programming experience, yes, you just say, here's my GitHub page. I've got an average, 300 check-ins a year, right? And then have people look at your code, look at your commenting. That's a much better way of getting a job than having, on your CV you put, expert at C++. Because I can tell you, if you put on your CV, I can tell you right now you're not an expert, because if you were an expert, you wouldn't put that. Because experts know they're not experts, right? It's only novices that think they're experts. Right? So I'd say portfolio, and this goes for art or programming, it goes for games design. If you can show people you've put games out there, it doesn't matter the game wasn't a runaway success, but just you've been through the whole process of shipping and taking feedback and taking on a chin, worth its weight in gold. So portfolio.
So if people are starting to think about their portfolio on games, or whether it's programming exercises, what types of projects would you recommend? Is there any specific type that would benefit them most?
I'd focus on clever stuff that's well documented, doing stuff which is, say for example, say you do a Mario clone. So what? It doesn't really, it's interesting, but it's, I don't know if you've just downloaded all the assets or if you just downloaded all the platform game, from one of the plugins in Unity. But you start doing things which actually make you think a bit, I had a student who built she built a Tamagotchi on an embedded device. It's like one of these tiny little ESP32s, right, with a tiny little screen. So going back several decades, except for the CPU. And she built a Tamagotchi on this, all in C++, which is a stunning achievement. So I actually think look for interesting stuff rather than run-of-the-mill stuff. It's not about. Don't forget, you are most likely selling your skills, not the actual product. So if you've done, say for example, you've done a game that's got amazing neural network AI, your portfolio should really show this. So I would actually have a portfolio where all of the little agents in the game, they have little speech bubbles above their head telling you what they're thinking, because that's the clever bit. They're thinking, I've spotted the player. I'm going to give the player 5 seconds to get away. Right?
Yeah.
Because that's what's clever about it. So actually, you really target your portfolio towards employers.
I suppose one way to do that would be to figure out what kind of things you'd like to do and then go backwards from there based on what skills are required to do that job.
Absolutely. And I think university helps you do that. I think that's one of the things where university gives you that framework, because in the first year, you're probably going to be quite derivative, right? Because you're finding your feet. You're going to be doing stuff, that is kind of obvious and possibly a bit shallow. But by the second year, you'll have a bit more time on your hands, but you'll have formed those relations with other people so you can bounce ideas off them. So you can start getting more focused. So this is the other thing about portfolio. It'll evolve, right? And at some point, if you think about portfolio, you're better off having 5 or 6 really cool pieces that address the entire nature of the job you're going for, rather than having 20 really average pieces. This isn't about volume, it's about quality. So by the time you get to the second year, you'll probably be dumping some of the stuff that was your best of the stuff in the first year out of your portfolio and relegating it, and then putting the later stuff in. So it's kind of a continuous thing.
An iteration,
Iterate,
process, yeah.
and then just be really honest with yourself. What does this piece do for me? And have I got something better to show, to kind of show my skills?
In terms of, I suppose the advice was to start building your portfolio from day one. And what about languages? Because that's kind of a big thing when it comes to developing stuff, and particularly for programmers, developers.
Okay, if you're talking programmers, I would say nowadays Unity is almost like everyone assumes you've got Unity. So it's not necessarily a selling. Okay, think about this. Your CVs come in. Pretty much all the CVs will have Unity on them, because even you study Unity in pretty much every university doing a games course. It's kind of, you can do it at home. It's quite easy to get into. So I think Unity is almost like a sort of a hygiene level language you need to have. C# is important. I think obviously, because I would say with Unity, C# is more important than JavaScript. And then I think the real differentiator would be C++ and Unreal Engine.
Right.
Writing shaders, for example. Writing shaders is really mathematical and quite complicated. So writing shaders, writing networking code. So I'd say actually, for the entry level Unity, and I'd say Unity really for probably for mobile. I'd still use Unity for mobile, but if I was doing full screen games like PC or console games, I would really use Unreal Engine and do it in C++. So basically, you build the C++ systems which your blueprints then use. That's actually where game studios work. If they're using one of the games engine, they'll kind of build the stuff that has to run really quickly and is used by everyone in C++. And they'll expose it to designers as blueprints.
Right.
The more you get into that workflow, the more it's going to feel like a comfortable pair of shoes when you go to the interview. Right. So I'd say C++. I think I know it's a relatively old language. I also think if you're looking at web development, looking at some of the newer systems like React, right? React.js. Obviously, JavaScript is quite important for dynamic web. HTML5. WebGL, all of those are desirable skills. The reality is, the harder it is the harder thing you do, the fewer people will do it. So therefore, the fewer people will compete with you at that level.
Fair enough. Yeah. And speaking of interviews, is there any specific practical advice you'd like to provide to those who are expecting their first interview?
Yeah. First of all, the interview starts the day you send your CV off, and the interview finishes when you pass your probation. Right. So that's one thing to think about. It's the interview is not just a point in time. So you won't get the interview if your CV isn't relevant. If it's not addressing the skills. So I would always say when you're looking at wanting to get an interview, you need to look at a job description and look at your CV side by side and get a highlighter pen highlight all the things that are essential skills in the job description, and highlight the corresponding things in your CV. And what you should see, if the highlight is yellow, you should see a good amount of yellow on your CV. If you don't, your CV is wrong. You're not going to get an interview, right? Because that's how they score CVs, right? So make sure your CV is relevant when you go to the interview. Be really honest, right? If you, this has actually happened to me. Somebody came to the interview. I was interviewing when I was a VP at Electronic Arts. Some guy came to me for a producing role, and he told me, I asked him what games he worked on. He said he worked on a game called Theme Park World, and he was the producer on it. And I thought, okay, so I interviewed it for an hour. And then at the end, I said to him, it's really interesting. He said, you're the producer on Theme Park World, because I was the executive producer on this. I've never met you. Right? So it turns out he inflated his CV, right? It didn't stop me spending an hour having fun with him, right? He didn't get a job, right? Do your research. If you're going to go for a company, research the company. Do not apply for a job at King.com and then walk in the interview saying, I hate free to play. It's what they make their money on. Just be realistic about what you're going for. Really ruthless to do your research. When you start looking at, for example, I deal with programming roles specifically. Look at everyone who's advertising programming roles. Find the websites that have good job descriptions, even if you don't want to apply there. Right? Say, for example, you don't want to work at EA. EA write really good job descriptions. Look at their job descriptions, download them. Have a look at King. They write good job descriptions, right? I would say Creative Assembly, write good job descriptions. Make yourself a Frankenstein's monster of all of those job descriptions you've read, and that becomes your kind of target job description, which you can bet your bottom dollar will be what they're looking for. All other companies will look for the same person. And then you score your CV against that. And then by the time you go there, there's really going to be really good overlap between what they want. So research. Being really clear, I think by far the best way to understand a company is to talk to some of the people who work there. So, I mean, this is tricky these days with COVID, but my advice would be, if you want to work in the games business, hang out in the pubs in Guildford. Because you're going to bump into games developers, right? And they're going to be talking very freely about what they do. And you get a really good sense, of what to do. Ask people for advice. Don't ask them for a job. Ask them for advice. And there's a good chance they'll then say, well, by the way, we've got that job going. Do you want to apply for it? And by that point, they already know you. So, don't be shy. And do not assume that they're going to come to you just because you left university with a first-class degree. They won't. They really won't. They've got dozens of first-class degrees coming in. It's how you apply yourself. So just do your research. It's
being honest, doing research, and really networking. Honest.
Yeah. A couple of little tricks for the interview. Be ready for them asking you, are there things you've done that went wrong? Right? That's one of the questions to practice. And of course, when you practice the answer to that, you don't want to say, and everybody died at the end. Right? It's got to have a happy ending, right? What they're looking for is whether you're prepared to learn, pick yourself up and move on, right? The question most people struggle with most is, tell me about something that went right. And most people go really shy and go, something must have gone right in your life. You might have won a game jam or something. So make sure you've got those anecdotes ready. If they're asking you any questions at the end, don't ask them if the Friday night beers is for everybody. Or if you really get 4 weeks holiday, right? You want to ask them some questions really pertinent to the company and about your, it's perfectly valid to say to them, so what does the career path for a programmer look like? Where could I be in 5 years' time? That's a really valid question. It's a good question. I'd want you to ask that question. Because it makes me think. You're already thinking about the future. You're thinking about
so it's more of a long-term commitment rather than just
So really, I'd say practice your interview technique with other people. Make sure other people read your CV, and when they're telling you that they don't understand things in your CV, don't tell them they're wrong. Just listen. Learn to listen.
Right. Well, these are about things and anecdotes that went wrong or right, depending on how it went for them. What about the kinds of skills that are not technical skills? So if you are hiring...
I call them traits. Traits are so important, right? And these are personality traits. Like, for example, sense of urgency, right? I'd like to have people in my company with a sense of urgency, which means that they won't get stuff done, right? So how do you sell something? You say to somebody, I've got a sense of urgency. And I go, okay, prove it. How do you prove you've got a sense of urgency? Right? Well, one would be that you got your job application in not on the last day before they close, right? Another one would be that actually you've worked on a number of projects and hit deadlines.
So
right?
being punctual and being able to work under pressure.
Yeah. How would you prove you're a good team player? Well, you'd have worked on team projects, right?
Mm.
How would you prove you're good, I know you're a good person, like a good people manager? Well, they would have probably picked you to run the team. You would have gravitated towards the project management, right? These are all traits, right? So you want to make sure those traits come across, right? When you do your CV and when you do your interview, use power words. Like, for example, I was responsible for doing the builds for the game jam. Right, I'm going to come back to game jams. Right, I was responsible for doing the builds of game jam. I was responsible for doing this. That means I'm taking the blame for it. Right, it shows that you didn't just go, well, if it's somebody else's fault, I'm taking the blame for this. I'm taking responsibility. The best way by far to show some of the traits off in a favorable way is to do game jams. Game jams are as close as you'll ever get to being an industry, and employers know this. That's why they really favor game jams. That's why a lot of times they're really supportive of people doing game jams. They give us goodies, they come and visit because they realize that's really putting you on this environment where you're shipping something, which is actually what to do for a living. So immerse yourself in game jams as much as you possibly can.
And essentially experience almost the entire thing, I suppose, from an idea to a final product.
Absolutely. And then when you're talking in your CV, you write up the traits as if you know the vocabulary, right? So when you're writing it up, right, you don't go, I did the game jam, I was responsible for programming, right? You write, on the game jam, I was the primary programmer writing the C++ objects that were then being used as blueprints by my classmates. The subsystems I wrote an inventory system, right, which used linked lists, and I wrote another system that used an array. Now I know, first of all, you know the terminology, you know what you're doing, you thought about the workflow, and you've done the right thing, all in the same sentence. That's the first one. So just be really clear. If it all pops, and if you talk the part of a programmer, they'll just go, I can imagine sitting next to that person and talking to them about programming, right? And I use my party analogy. You're doing your job right if you're going to a party with lots of people, and you're gravitating towards 2 or 3 people that are, maybe half a dozen people talking in a group, and you start getting on a technical subject, and gradually other people drift away. That's when you know you're right, because the people who stay are your peers. There's a group of people you're talking, you're normally talking to. So actually, don't be afraid of being geeky. Absolutely not. Be really geeky, but also be quite measured. Understand there's a business, right? Understand there's time pressure. And most important, I think, really try and be yourself. Of course, you can shape who you are by kind of changing your behaviors, but they will find you out. If you're lying at an interview, they will find you out. Right? Yeah. If you go to an interview and you put on your CV, expert at C++, I will prove you wrong. Right? I will make it my job to prove you wrong.
So we talked about sort of one side of things in terms of how to get a job, but what about the actual companies and workplaces where you'd like to work at, for example, if you're graduating this year?
You should know who they are already, because you should have gone to all of their free parties. Right? So if you haven't done this, just figure out who they are. I mean, I live in Brighton. I could name 10 companies that are currently hiring, right? So and that's just by knowing, just looking around, following LinkedIn, following, what they're posting on Facebook, right? In a funny sort of way, the people being at home has been a real boost for the games business. People playing more games.
Yeah.
So actually, games business have done quite well, and games business are still hiring. So I'd say just figure out who the companies are that are hiring, and then go make sure you link in with them, make sure you follow them, on Twitter, and try and figure out what the culture is like. If you know somebody there, that's really helpful, not for nepotism, but because they can tell you what it's actually like to work there, right? So just do your research. do your research, find the companies, make sure your CVs gel with what they're looking for, with their job descriptions, and then be persistent. Yeah, be persistent. You are literally, you're calling up the pile of everything you do in your CV will help you call up the pile of CVs on the hiring manager's desk. If you imagine there's 100 CVs, there's probably 60 of those that have not read the job description. They go straight in the bin, right? Now you're down to 40 CVs, and then it's okay. So how do I climb up the leaderboard of 40 CVs?
Right.
Getting more and more relevant, right?
Yeah.
And how to become relevant? Well, I researched the company. Name drop the fact in your application letter. Name drop the fact you've played the last game, and you can talk about it. They don't necessarily want you to be a fan about the game. They want you to know the game. But if they might ask you, "Oh, I've played. I don't know. I can't think of game. I've played Watch Dogs, right? Say it's Ubi. I played Watch Dogs. They might ask you, what do you not like about it?
Yeah.
Be honest, right? Be honest. Right? So you're not going to tell them any secrets, right? I mean, obviously, don't go in and say I hate everything the company does, because then why are you applying for a job? But it's really this measure. The other thing is, even if you have no intention of taking a job, go for interviews. Every interview is a free consultancy opportunity to help you hone your skills, right?
And you get more experience every time you go in.
Please don't go with the, I'm only going to apply for the 2 jobs, the ones I really want. Apply for 10 jobs, go to all the interviews, right? You can always say no, but you've just had an hour or 2 training of how to actually ace the next interview.
And in addition, you will get more confidence. You'll build up your confidence.
Get more contacts, you get more confidence, right? And to be honest, after a while, I've seen so many really good people interview and getting up to like they're getting down to 2nd or 3rd choice and not getting the job, right? And it's the last interview where they go to, the last 2 interviews where they go to, when they actually have given up and they're just but they're going through the interview game and they've suddenly relaxed. They're no longer getting the heart beating through the roof, and they're not getting the sweats, and they're just going through this. Then suddenly you've got 3 job offers. So you could go for 10 interviews, get nothing, and then suddenly you go for 3. This actually happened to a student of mine. Went for 10 weeks or 12 weeks of interviews with 12 interviews or something. Not a single offer, right? But it always came 2nd or 3rd. Then the last 3 interviews, 3 offers. Bang, 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 right? At which point he was then negotiating for the best job out of those 3. So
really good example, yeah.
Yeah, don't be disheartened. Just keep going, right? There's a huge amount of luck. So just don't assume it's all under your control. And the way you get lucky is you just do more than the other person. If somebody only applies for 5, if somebody applies for 2 jobs and you've applied for 10, you've got 5 times the chances to do
yeah, exactly.
Right. So play the odds.
Right. And just to finish off this discussion, what would you say, based on your previous experience in the industry, the next big thing would be in, suppose, game tech?
Next big thing in game tech.
Would that involve VR of some sort?
I think VR is going to be reserved for industrial applications. I think VR for games is dead again. I mean, sorry, the reason I say this, I don't really down on this, but this is my 5th iteration of VR. I'm an old man. I've seen it 5 times. It's the latest thing, and then it dies a death, right? I think VR is brilliant for industrial applications. In fact, I'm working on a VR project right now for the RAF, right? It's really good, right, for really specific things. But the reality is wearing a headset for more than about 5 minutes is not comfortable. We're not in that, unless it becomes like this,
Yeah.
It's just not comfortable. I think online, right? Online, and I'll tell you what, if you can crack how to make spectating as engaging as playing, right, I think you're onto a real winner. And I think this is already happening, but right now the technologies are disparate.
Right.
I think the real play is you kind of come up with a holistic system where spectating and playing become seamless, right? I think that's going to be huge. I was kind of thinking, if you ask me, I think streaming will come along at some point, but I think it's probably going to take a little bit longer because the thing about streaming is that means you can have a massive, like Netflix, a massive array of games playable on a subscription basis. I think it's going to be really interesting what's going to happen in the mobile space, because it seems to be people are rebelling against the mobile ecosystem.
Right.
So that could be ready for disruption. 30% paying to the app stores. I think bringing people into spectating would be where my money is, and doing it in a way that's really engaging.
That would be quite interesting. So you'll be watching a gameplay, and then you could join in immediately. Is that what you're thinking?
Well, kind of like that, but almost like it's like having your champions, and like esports, and then following your champions, and so actually following your champions becomes a game. It becomes like a meta game on the game, just like fantasy football.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be really interesting to see what happens with this. I also think there's obviously massive opportunities for doing different sorts of games. I think AR's got a future more so than VR. I think AR is really interesting, bringing the real world and the computer world together. Definitely connecting stuff. Multi. I was going to say multiplayer, but I think multiplayer is just one aspect of this.
Yeah.
But just his ability to bring people together in one experience, I think, is really huge. I mean, I'm blown away by GTA 5. I'm just blown away by the fact that they've built like this set, and you can do stuff in this set where you can just have more and more missions. I think this building these game worlds, I think, is pretty huge.
So it's almost like an endless sandbox of.
Yeah, I mean, it's like TV. Friends. Look at Friends, or look at in my days Frasier, or look at some of these TV shows that have just run for years and years and years, decades. And I think there's definitely a place for games to be like that. So you really just belong somewhere.
Yeah, that's really interesting thought. It's almost like progressing from multiplayer online games.
Yeah, and I think this idea that you build a world and the world is consistent to its rules, like EVE Online or something like that.
Yeah.
I think that's really. I think EVE is a little bit esoteric, and so is Elite. I think it's it's got, the audience is too niche, but I think somebody will nail how to make this as interesting as as I don't know. If you think about something like Gogglebox, Gogglebox on TV is you're watching people watching TV.
Yeah.
Do you know? Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I do think there's going to be stars, and there's going to be people following stuff, and making a seamless experience. I think could be really interesting. And it's not quite there yet. It's getting there, but it's not quite there yet.
Right. Well, thanks for everything today, and that was really nice chatting with you about tech and game development and all things computing. Hopefully this was useful for you guys, the audience, and if you like these sort of discussions, interviews, then I'll be trying to do more of these things in the future. And thanks to Richard for joining me today.
Yeah.
And thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next video.
Ken, good luck.